Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wednesdays at 1. Um, Now is the time to go and grab your Bible and turn to chapter 34 of Genesis. We are working along in Genesis, and we are just about ready today. I think we will probably finish the Jacob cycle. If you have not been with me for a couple of weeks, the last story that we did was um, basically the story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob wrestling with the angel, perhaps God, perhaps Esau himself, um, and then coming to reunite with his brother, whom he had tricked and taken birthright and blessing from by stealth and trickery. So that reunion has happened. Esau and Jacob had come to a resolution and a reconciliation, and they were planning on settling. And Jacob said, "You go ahead, and I'll follow you." And then he decided to go the other way. So that is what has happened. Now, Jacob has gone to Shechem, which is the city where he went to settle, where Esau went the other way. So Esau really went into the land that we soon would call Israel, which is, I know, confusing because Jacob changes his name to Israel, but the land of Israel with Samaria as the capital, which happens much later as far as the time of the judges and the kings. But just for you to get your brain set in the right place. So we're talking about ancient Palestine, the northern part of that, what would become the northern kingdom and be called Israel. That's where Esau went with his people to settle, and Jacob went elsewhere to the town of Shechem. So we're going to start here with a lovely and happy story, wrong, of the rape of one of Jacob's daughters. Most of us read that Dinah, but for an ancient name of that area, it would be pronounced Dinah. So this is the story of the rape of Dinah, and Dinah. They've been living in this area around Shechem, and so farther away from Esau than he could do. So I'm going to read a little bit and then we'll get into some conversation. I think you may have some questions, as most people do when they read this story, thinking about all that has gone before with Jacob and Esau, and the stealing of the birthright, and the taking of the blessing, and then the going away and the coming back and the reunion and all of that with Jacob and his family. Now, Jacob, you realize, is, if you will recall, married Rachel, but Rachel's father replaced Rachel with Leah, her sister. So then Jacob worked another 7 years to win the woman of his dreams, which was Rachel. So he has Rachel and Leah are his wives, and then they had two handmaidens who also bore Jacob's sons. So we've got sons from all four, the two real wives and the two handmaidens. So the family is getting quite big, and you will recall then that Jacob had 12 sons, and that one of them is Joseph. And as soon as we finish the Jacob cycle, we'll be moving into the story of Joseph for the remainder of the book of Genesis. So I'm going to begin reading at chapter 34, and this is titled The Rape of Dinah. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the region. And when Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the region, saw her, he seized her and lay with her by force. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl to be my wife." Now Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his cattle in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, just as the sons of Jacob came in from the field. When they heard of it, The men were indignant and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The heart of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and get property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor with you, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Put the marriage present and gift as high as you like, and I will give whatever you ask me. Only give me the girl to my wife." The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, that you will become as we are, and every male among you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live among you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his family. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These people are friendly with us. Let them live in the land and trade in it, for the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will they agree to live among us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their animals be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will live among us." And all who went out of the city gate heeded Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. Now on the third day, when they were still in pain, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city unawares and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And the other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because their sister had been defiled. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in their houses, they captured and made their prey. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of this land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should our sister be treated like a whore?" Okay. Here we have a very interesting story. We read it contemporarily as a story of abuse, as we should. That it's horrifying that this person should come and rape this young woman. And all of the stories that go along with any kind of violence against females is part of this, where she has no voice, if you noticed, no voice at all in this story. What has happened to her, Shechem, the perpetrator, has tried to make amends for his rape of her, his victimization of her, by marrying her and saying, "Oh, I love her, I must have her," whatever. And apparently, she has come into his household because that is where her brothers remove her. It says they took their swords and came against the city and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. So there's this strange dynamic going on here about abuse of women and the violence against women, but it is not necessarily a male thing on this. I'm not going to, beat up the male gender for this, because the abuse of women, and there have been reams and reams and reams written on this from many authors, especially in the contemporary age. But if you look back, just even in this first book of the Bible in Genesis, thus far, we have had many abuses and violence against women. You go all the way back to Abraham, and the fact that Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham for the purposes of him having sex with her. That is not consensual. The abuse is there, and then the violence of her being turned out with her child into the wilderness. So that story exists. There is a very famous book by Phyllis Tribble from years and years ago called Texts of Terror. And these are some of the stories that are in that book, and just how different society is and what were the points of including these stories in the narrative of God's story of the Old Testament. So we have Hagar and that story. And then shortly after that, we have the story of Lot and his daughters in Sodom and Gomorrah. And the men of the city come to get the visitors who happen to be messengers from God, and he's protecting them and saying, no, I'm not going to send them out to you so that you can victimize them, but let me send my daughters. So we have that lovely text of terror where the women have no say. It is just they are being put into a situation not of their not something that they chose for themselves, but they have been literally victimized. And then we have the story of Zilpah and Bilhah, who are the handmaidens of Leah and Rachel. And now we're in this generation with Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and they both give their maidservants to Jacob so that he may have sex with them to make children. It's almost, it makes you think of the what we know about the sharecroppers and the landowners who had slaves, and that they just took the slave women whenever they felt like it and had children with them, and then turned the children back over to the slave women or took them into their household, depending on the slave owners. But these are texts of terror that just are dropped all throughout Genesis. And the question that modern scholars, especially female scholars, ask is, why did God allow this? And why did God why were these stories included in the narrative of God's relationship with humanity? And part of that is you look back and you say, well, if we're going to have a real story of humanity, then we're going to have the great, and we're going to have the terrible. And this is part of the terrible. Interesting, though, that some scholars would respond to that question of why are these included, or why did God not intervene? And the answer to that would be, when I always talk about why we study who the authors were, who was the audience who was writing, and what was the purpose of them writing to this particular audience. You can imagine that this part of Scripture was written primarily and probably exclusively by men of the time, and in that culture where women were indeed property. And so there was no moral or ethical situation. And honestly, the fact that the brothers take it upon themselves to avenge the degradation of Dinah is unusual. This is the first time that anyone has stood up and said, wait, stop, we took vengeance because we didn't want our sister to be treated like a whore. So there's a little turning point there that even though as a woman she would have continued to be property, we have these two cultural responses. First of all, the one like Shechem who takes her, rapes her, and then tells everyone how much he loves her and can't stand it if he can't marry her. So his redemption of his own violent act is to just take her into his household and tell everyone how much she means to him, which is in itself kind of more the insult than the victimization and the terrorization. Is this idea that in a lifelong relationship with her, as long as she pleased him, um, he would just marry her, and that would excuse the behavior. So then this other amazing thing that sticks out is that the brothers, and one would wish that they had tried to avenge her in a little bit different way. Um, but that the fact that they even felt she needed to be avenged is a kind of a new thought here that comes in through um, this particular passage in Genesis 34. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. It really is. This is one of those things where you kind of go along and you like, things are good, people are prospering, people are getting what they want, they're marrying, they're having children, their flocks are increasing, their herds are increasing, brothers are reconciling, things are going good. This is really good. Everybody's settling down someplace, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get this, once settled, the whole man's inhumanity to man, or humans inhumanity to other humans, starts to raise its head yet again. So one of the things I did want to point out here is that one of the errors I think that the boys made in their tricking of the entire town to have all the males circumcise themselves, the king, Hamor, and his son Shechem were talking about, if you let these people in and we become one people, then we get the goods that they bring with it. We start to share all this in common. We get their women, they get our women. We start to intermarry. There's all kinds of benefit to this, and it is a small price to pay to circumcise. However, the circumcision itself was the mark of the covenant. And so some scholars would question, okay, um, you know, shall we say then that if they circumcise for the purposes of becoming one with the people of God, does that make them people of God? Or do you have to have the belief in the covenant for that to be, shall we say, efficacious? And that would be an interesting conversation to apply then to Peter and Paul and the conversation that they were having in Jerusalem over whether or not Gentiles who had converted or wanted to become Christian had to first keep the Jewish law and be circumcised. And Peter said yes, and Paul said absolutely not. They come by faith, and they are received by faith, and there is no need for them to become Jewish and to go through that step that Christ now mediates the relationship between God. And so Paul was the one who said, no, that's not true. So, but we see it here in the question that would arise, I think, when scholars look at this, is they continue to talk about only on this condition, the condition of circumcision, would they agree to live among us to become one people. So they were definitely doing the circumcision ritual not as a holy covenantal act, but as something to become people and to access the wealth and actually the people that belonged to Jacob and his family. So, um, some interesting things there. And that doesn't even get, I think I remember, I can't remember if it was a movie or a series or something where they depict this destruction of the town. And the whole thing is predicated on the fact that Dinah and Shechem are truly in love, and they make it this whole big romantic thing, and she doesn't want to leave, and then her brothers come and kill Shechem, and then she's angry with her brothers because this was the great love of her life and all that. That's bunk, that's Hollywood, because that idea, think about what that does as far as if you study women's issues and justice issues and about abuse of any kind. Why would the act of rape is not something that you can just toss off and say, oh well, I ended up falling in love with him, and I just life was just wonderful after that. That's just not true. That just doesn't happen. So the act of violence pretty much sets the stage for the rest of the woman's life anyway. Um, so abuse has been around for a very, very long time. Okay, let's see. I lost video. Is anyone else having trouble? Usually if people are losing video, I'm freezing up or you're freezing up, but it seems to be going okay. Couple of, if you have access and can quickly post something, just say if you're doing okay out there, or if everybody's gone and I'm talking to the wind. Regardless, I'm making a video, so if you come back later, you'll be able to pick it up. Okay, so I'm going to move on. If you think of something and you want to ask a question, please feel free. And let's move on to, this is Jacob. Okay, Melissa is back. Pam's okay. Brenda's okay. So reporting from all points of town, north, south, east, and west. So, okay. It looks like we're okay from most places. So, Melissa, I hope if you lose it again, just come back and watch it as a video. It will continue to record, and we'll have that video feed. Okay, so moving on to Genesis 35. Now Jacob has chastised his sons, and his sons have said, hey, we were just doing what we should have done. So we're going to move on now. And Jacob is shrugging, not kind of not knowing how to carry on here. So guess what? He's going to talk to God, as he seems to be able to do very easily. So 35. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and settle there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, that I may make an altar there to the God who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak that was near Shechem. As they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities all around them, so that no one pursued them. Jacob came to Luz, that is, Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. And Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried under an oak below Bethel. So it was called Allon Bakuth. God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. No longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." So he was called Israel. God said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall spring from you. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. Then God went up from him at the place where he had spoken with him. Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. So Jacob called the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. Okay, I do want to take a minute here to kind of pick up some stuff in this. Bethel was the place where Jacob had run to Bethel when he was escaping from the wrath of Esau at the beginning of the story. After Rebekah, his mother, had deceived um, Isaac, the father, um, with covering him with animal skins and animal hair so that Isaac would think that Jacob was Esau, who should have gotten the firstborn's blessing. So Jacob is on the run and on his way to go find Rachel, or with Laban, his mother's brother, his uncle. There he was going to go to that land, but he stops here in Bethel once he escapes Esau and made an altar. So he's returning to this place where he escaped the first time, but now he's coming from the other direction. So it's kind of a interesting coming full circle, that he's going to make a new covenant, that he's going to make a new agreement, that he's going to renew the covenant relationship. And that's why we have this recitation in 9 through 15 of the covenant to Abraham and Isaac, as if God is reminding him or giving him at this point the stuff that he gave to Abraham and Isaac. But it was very clear that that belonged to him from the very beginning. So you kind of wonder why the reiteration, other than for maybe liturgical purposes or in storytelling purposes, when you repeat certain sections, so that you can just remember it. I'm looking, see, he had committed an outrage in Israel. Wasn't Jacob named Israel before the land was called Israel? Yes. And was Jacob named Israel twice? Yes. So, yes. And again, if we went back to look, I bet that we're talking two strands of authorship. And this time we're not necessarily talking the difference between the Yahwist and the Elohist, or the Lord God and the God depiction, or the titling of God, to show the different strands of authorship. But now we're getting into the place where we're including also the priestly strand. And you can see that as we come back to Bethel now. We have this whole thing about making the altar and pouring out a drink offering and all these things, whereas before we also had the sacrifice of an animal and a burnt offering and that kind of thing. All that stuff about offerings and all that practice had not really been codified in the generations of Abraham's descendants, and wouldn't be really until Moses and the wilderness. So we've not had any place where God has said, go do this, and then they fulfilled God's instruction. So this is the priestly account, putting back into the narrative these ritual actions that will become very, very important to the people of Israel, as they move along and become, the nation of Israel. So yeah, good catch, Pam, that's it's kind of a repetitive sort of thing. I did want to one of the things, I'm reading a new commentary about this, and one of the things that this commentary points out is that this whole, going back to the rape of Dinah, is an embarrassment for Jacob. And, he's kind of, I think he also was looking to make some kind of pact with the Canaanites, and he saw this as a good opportunity to do that. And I'm not sure that he understood what the boys were doing when they were just, telling Hamor and Shechem, all you have to, you can't have our sister, and we can't make this pact with you unless we're one people, and this is what you have to do. You have to circumcise yourselves, knowing full well what they were planning. I'm not sure that Jacob was privy to that. It doesn't say, but this commentary is saying that Jacob's embarrassment and the peril to the family seems to maintain what we will subsequently learn is that the prohibition between intermarrying with the Canaanites. So Canaanites and Israelites were not, they were not to intermarry. And so now he comes back. Oh, and then there's this sense, and I was talking about the priestly account, this sense of purity, of purifying themselves. That you're supposed to put away the foreign gods. You're supposed to purify yourselves and change your clothes. So that's a signal that they're trying to do a repentance ritual, that this is a turning around. They're going to start a new life. And they give to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that there were, so any gold, any kind of imagery, any kind of idolatry or anything that might have reminded them of the other gods were given to Jacob, and he hid them under an oak. Perhaps because at some point he planned to come back and use that wealth for something. Okay, so the interesting note here in this commentary, this is the first time that the verb tahar, to purify, is used, which denotes a ritual purification. The last time we heard this word was during the flood narrative, where the term is used to reference ritually clean animals that were permitted for eating on the ark in the Yahwist's account. Okay, so in the J strand, where God is known as God, Yahweh, long before those practices were put into place. So interesting little, again, you see the priestly narrative being woven into the story so that things will be there. And then the blessing at Bethel, where God, he encounters God, and God gives him the be fruitful and multiply, which is a priestly blessing that we first heard in Genesis in the first chapter. So, if as you get to know these stories a little bit better, you see a lot more of that. Let's go on then, and I think, but again, you see, the hand of God is in all of this. Part of this could be, when I say as men were authoring this, they are trying to make sense of their history in terms of the hand of God, that God is drawing them towards something, that God is leading them, inviting them forward into God's plan, as we call it now in modern times. But as he calls Jacob to go and return to Bethel, and then as they move on from there, all of the cities who may have come after him to keep him from moving forward, God sends a terror to fall upon the cities. We don't know what that is, but God is protecting him, and God is making a way for him in a place that is a place of danger. Okay, so let's see what else God has in mind for this family of Jacob. This is at verse 16, 35:16. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor. When she was in her hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, for now you will have another son." As her soul was departing, for she died, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried. Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar at her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Now, it is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Adair. While Israel lived in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. So just quickly here, wanted to just mention Benjamin is going to be one of the family favorites and also the closest to Joseph. Joseph and Benjamin being full brothers with the same parents, Rachel and Jacob. And so there were kind of little mini clans within the 12 sons. You know, you had Gad and Asher who were, you know, with one mom and Jacob. And then you have Dan and Naphtali with another mom and Jacob. And then you have Benjamin and Joseph with Rachel and Jacob. And then all the rest of them from Leah, who was the first wife. Not the chosen wife, but the first wife. So all of these sons come from this union between Jacob and you'd think he had enough going on here that he wouldn't have minded after all these abuses that have happened throughout the time up until now. But apparently it was not okay when Reuben went and lay with Bilhah because Bilhah was his father's concubine, not to mention the maid of, I forget which one, Bilhah. I'm sorry, the maid of Rachel. So, you know, it's interesting to me, I think, that, you know, there are rules sometimes very, very, very strictly held, and then other times the rules don't seem to matter. You know, women have worth and value depending on what they have produced as far as offspring and what and how the patriarch, you know, feels about them. So so we have 12 sons, and now we have enough to move this generation forward, and from here we get the 12 tribes of Israel, hence the name, because Israel was the father of the 12 sons who became the tribal seedbed. So Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre. So now we're going back a generation. Jacob was the son of Isaac, Jacob and Esau. Okay. Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had resided as aliens. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last. He died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Note, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Now, not that burying a father together means that everything has been all hunky-dory throughout the time. But I think it's interesting that the last time we saw them, they had reunited. Esau had forgiven him, embraced him, brought him back into relationship with these two brothers. And then Jacob goes off on his own and, you know, doesn't do what Esau has suggested. So who knows? Did he break that bond again, or was Esau just at this point, you know, yeah, it's just Jacob, that's the way he is. But regardless, they come together to bury their father, and I think that's just really cool that they did that, and that we get that that picture of the two sons who have been at such enmity throughout their lives now together for the purposes of burying their father. Okay, I want to go ahead and go through 36. There's a lot of names here, and you know, so just turn yourself on autopilot, or if you want to go, you know, if you're following along in a Bible, you might want to try put circles or underline some of these names that do ring some bell to you, and see how many of them you have some interest in. But I want to finish this off because this is the end of the Jacob cycle, and then, as I mentioned, we'll start with Joseph's cycle in 37 next week. So 36:1. These are the descendants of Esau, okay, Jacob's brother Esau, who now is renamed Edom, Edom. Esau took his wives from the Canaanites. Okay, so now we see another part of the enmity is that Esau has intermarried. He's intermarried with the Canaanites, who it was apparently the whole idea of the possession of the land is predicated on adhering to the standard of not intermarrying. So this is one of the problems that Esau brings with him is that his wives came from the Canaanites. Adah, daughter of Elon the Hittite, Aholibamah, daughter of Anah, son of Zibeon the Hivite, and Bazimath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nabiath. Now, isn't that interesting? There's a name that we recognize, Ishmael, okay, who was Isaac's other son. We had Isaac, and we had, I'm sorry, not Isaac's other son. Now I'm confusing myself. Abraham's other son. So we have Ishmael's daughter. Okay. So Ishmael, that side, the the bad boy side or the cast out side or the ones who didn't have the clearest lineage are still in the lineage of these two boys. That continues to bring itself up, and that they're continuing to come around. So Abraham has the two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael gets cast out. We don't hear from him, and he goes off to spawn the Arab race. Now his daughter, who is a Canaanite, comes back to marry, within the family of her uncle. Okay. So then we have sister Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, Bazimath bore Ruel, and Hohilabama bore Yeush, Jalam, and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his household, his cattle and all his livestock, and all the property he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and he moved to a land some distance from his brother Jacob. So this time he's the one who moves further away. For their possessions were too great for them to live together. The land where they were staying could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. Now, again, interesting that we get this idea that even if they had completely reconciled, okay, they could not have lived in the same area because the land would not have supported their flocks and their, and what they had. So they both made their fortune, and their fortune kept them apart from each other, which might have been a good thing. Is the grave marked of Isaac? I do not know that. I'm trying to remember from my traveling in the Holy Land. I don't think so. Hebron, it would have been in Hebron. That's a Wikipedia question or a Google question. And you can either Google it and find out, or I will do it afterwards and I'll tell you next time. Okay? Is that fair? I don't have that one in my database. Okay. Then here we have, okay, wait a minute. I don't think I want to read to you all of these names, but if you would like to read some of these names to yourself, and look, I'm just scanning to see if there are people in here that you would recognize, and I don't see any. So the bunches and bunches of children coming from bunches and bunches of women. And then we have clans of the sons of Esau, clans, so then each clan is put together. And again, I'm looking to see if there are people in here whose names we would recognize. And I am not seeing anything here. But we got a number of women and a number of sons. Sometimes they mention daughters, but mostly just sons. Okay, and then after we name the genealogy of Esau, now known as Edom, we're going to talk about who's ruling over the land. These are the kings. This is at verse 31. These are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom, therefore, before any king reigned over the Israelites. Bela, son of Beor, reigned in Edom, the name of his city being Dinhabah. Bela died, and Joab, son of Zerah the Bozrah, succeeded him as king. Jobab died, and Husham of the land of the Temanites succeeded him as king. Husham died, and Hadad, son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the country of Moab, succeeded him as king, and the name of his city being Avith. Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah succeeded him as king. Samlah died, and Shaul of Rehoboth on the Euphrates succeeded him as king. Shaul died, and Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, succeeded him as king. Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, died, and Hadar succeeded him as king, the name of his city being Pau. His wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, daughter of Mezahab. These are the names of the clans of Esau, according to their families and their localities by their names, the clans Timnah, Alva, Jetheth, Oholibamah, Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Timon, Mibzar, Magdiel, and Iram. These are the clans of Edom, that is Esau, the father of Edom, according to their settlements in the land that they held. So you can see this idea of when we get on the other side of the wilderness, we got hundreds and hundreds of years to go now. But when we do that and they settle in the promised land, this is how they did it. As sons were born, the property was divided or new property was given. As the flocks and the herds increased, they were divided and given to sons so that each son had a piece of land and each son had a herd or a property. These are all, nomads and agrarian type folks, are not agrarian, but the society was agrarian, but these were herdsmen. They had flocks, and that's how they made their living. They haven't settled yet and done any kind of seeding and harvesting. That's going to come a little bit later. So, but you see how this happens. There's a man who has a great deal of property. Has to actually divide from his family members because there's not enough to support the herds. And so on this side, we've got Esau, Edom, and his descendants, and how he has divvied up the land, or maybe he has gotten more land as this has gone on, and giving land to each of the sons so that there are families and localities of the clans. The tribes, okay, clans and tribes. And that's what we're going to see then as we get into the promised land and divvy up the land for the 12 tribes. And so Joseph and his family will have land, and Reuben and his family will have land, and Simeon and his family will have land. So that's the way they did it, and that's just how they claimed the land and settled there. And so that was, that's kind of the thing. Okay, I'm seeing this. Back in 23:9, the place called Machpelah was the burial place of Sarah and Abraham, as well as Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. Lutheran Study Bible, page 76. Thank you. I don't have mine with me at home. Was purchased by Abraham, which signals the beginning of Abraham's acquisition of the promised land of Canaan for Israel's descendants. Okay. So, oh yeah, that's what he made that deal. I remember him making that deal for the land with Abimelech, I think. And so they go back to the homeland where they had settled. Nice to know that it's sorry that Rachel had to have her own place because she died in childbirth while they were traveling. So Jacob and number one wife Leah are then laid down with the patriarchs. Interesting. See, that Lutheran Study Bible, everybody should have one. And I should have one, except I have a great big one and it's at church, so I don't have that. So anyway, thank you for that, Pam, our researcher. I should have just sent her off on that at the very beginning. So next time we're going to start with Genesis 37. We start with Joseph, the almost youngest of the clan of Israel. And as we go through this, you're going to see all kinds of things going on behind your eyes. You're going to see the Prince of Egypt, and you're going to see Ben-Hur, and you're going to see all kinds of different pictures that Hollywood has given us of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat and all kinds of things that you've got. So, just get ready for the story of Joseph and get ready to hear the story, which I'm sure is going to conflict with some of those images that you have going around from Hollywood in this, how these stories are depicted. So read ahead if you want. The next 13 chapters are all about Joseph, and that will conclude then the study of Genesis. So we can already start thinking about where we're going next. We might want to switch back over to a gospel. We're starting a new gospel in the end of this month, next month, when we begin Advent 1 on November 29th. So that week, maybe December 2nd, we should start looking at Mark, because that's our next gospel. Or if anybody else has something wonderful that they want to study, let's do it. We'll figure it out. You can always send me your ideas and tell me what you think. So next week, we will begin with the story of Joseph, and I hope you'll be with me. Thanks for being with me today. Appreciate your faithfulness, and for those of you who watch not live, hello to all of you. You're all in my prayers. Thanks for studying with me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.